What's up everybody? Welcome back to the Good View Woodworks channel. My name is Nathan, and in this video we are going to go over the top 5 tips that'll help you have perfect epoxy projects. You ready? Tip number 1. I can't stress this enough, but you guys need to use the correct epoxy. I get tons of comments and questions on my YouTube channel about people having issues with bubbling or cracking or smoking when it comes to pouring a river down a charcuterie board or pouring a coffee table river, any kind of river or spot that has a big void. I get a lot of comments wondering why there's bubbles, it's set up too quickly, cracks, things of that nature. So, tip number 1 is use the correct epoxy. So if you guys have seen any videos from my channel, I use 2 major types of epoxy. That would be countertop epoxy and casting epoxy. And I will link my favorite brands down in the description below. To fill a void, like a river or a big spot that takes a large mass of epoxy, you want to use a casting epoxy made and designed to pour up to 2 inches or more because it sets up slower and you won't get the bubbling and cracking and things like that. But if you're just using the epoxy as a coating, you don't want to use the casting epoxy. You want to use the tabletop epoxy. That is designed to only pour an 1/8 inch thick, and it's made for just a coating, okay? And so when you pour it thin like that, if it were a casting epoxy and you poured it thin, it would never cure. So make sure you guys choose the correct epoxy. Make sure you read before you buy something, read the description of the epoxy and choose the right one. Tip number 2. Tip number 2 is a big tip. Now, most of you guys may know this already, but I want to add a few things, okay? Tip number 2 is to mix properly. And you guys are probably like thinking to yourself, yeah, I know, you have to mix the right ratio of epoxy. But it's not only that, okay? Countertop epoxy, you mix, usually speaking, depending on the manufacturer, make sure you read their specs. It could be a 1-to-1 ratio, something like that. Most of the time it's 1-to-1, so make sure you know what ratio to mix. But besides that, you want to use, if you're mixing a large amount, a quart or more, you want to use a mixing paddle, okay? On a drill, use a drill mixer, and you want to stir it until the 2 parts combine. You'll see like it look cloudy. You want to mix until that is one solid color, no stringiness left. And usually that takes between 2 and 3 minutes, okay? But if you're mixing a very small batch, do not use the drill mixer because it will incorporate a lot of air into your product. You don't want that, okay? So I would suggest using a stir stick or something really small to mix that, and you want to mix that for 3 minutes if it's small, if it's like 16 ounces, okay? If it's something small like that, do not use the drill mixer, use the stir stick. Okay guys, tip number 3. Okay, tip number 3 comes into play when you're using epoxy as a finish, okay? Just a coating epoxy. I recommend that if you're using it as a coating epoxy to always round over the edges of your project, okay? Use a router with a 1/4 inch round over minimum to round the edges, okay? And you should do the top and the bottom. And the reason why I say this is because when you're using epoxy as a coating or a finish and you have sharp corners, the epoxy creates, or the corner creates a lot of surface tension, and the epoxy will not flow over. It'll break on that edge, okay? And no epoxy will stick to the edge, or it'll be very, very thin. So you want to round over those corners so the epoxy can flow over the edge and create a nice thick coat over the entire thing. Now, you want to round over the top and the bottom of your project so that When it rolls over the top, it'll also roll under the bottom and drip down past the edge, which gives you a really nice place once it starts to set up to clean all the drips off, and you will not notice the drips. So make sure you round the top and the bottom so it flows all the way around your project. Okay, tip number 3 leads me to tip number 4. Tip number 4. Tip number 4, you guys are not gonna like this tip, okay? But when it comes to using epoxy as a finish or a coating, you want to use enough epoxy that it rolls over the edge. Yes, technically you will be wasting some, but you will have a perfect project and you won't have to buy extra when you have to sand it down and recoat it, okay? So when you mix and spread your epoxy, you want it to run over the edge. You can even pour it along the edge to get it to fully coat the edge, okay? But this will keep you from having wavy edges or, you know, just edges that don't look professional, okay? So that's the tip number 4, is use enough epoxy to coat the entire surface and the edges. Tip number 5. This tip is something that I have, has to do with something that I have messed up in the past, and also my friends who have tried making epoxy tables have messed up in the past. And this tip number 5, is to create your form slightly larger than you want your finished table to be, okay? And the reason is, most of the time when you make your form, you're using caulk or glue or something in the corners to keep the epoxy from seeping outside the form, and that will get on the corners of your project. You always want to make it bigger just in case of some mistakes, but you want to make it slightly bigger so that you can cut your final project down to its final dimension, okay? So you make your river table or coffee table or whatever slightly larger, so that way once you're done prepping it and getting ready for finish, you can trim it to exactly the size that you want, okay? It's the best way to do these things because it saves you a lot of headache and can keep you from having to redo an entire project because it's slightly too small. You can always take off more wood, but you can't always add more on, okay? Okay, that's the end of the 5 tips. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, please click that like button. Also, share this with your friends. If this is your first time here, click that subscribe button. Also, ring the bell to the right of the subscribe button and click all notifications so that you get notified anytime that I post a new video. And with that being said, guys, thank you for watching. I will link all the products and everything in the description so you guys can go to Amazon and click it and get it if you want it. Feel free to go over to my website, goodviewwoodworks.com, to check out any of my other projects and to check out my pigments and other recommended products. You can go there. You can email me directly there. So go over to goodviewwoodworks.com and check it out. With that being said, guys, thank you for watching. And as always, thanks for hanging out with us.